I'm Rachel Belle, and this is Your Last Meal, the show where celebrities share stories about the foods they love most, and we dig into the history, culture, or science of those meals with experts from around the world. Today on the program, novelist Chuck Palahniuk. Chuck is most famous for Fight Club, his very first novel published in 1996. A few years later, it was adapted into the movie Fight Club, a cult classic starring Brad Pitt, Edward Norton, and Helena Bonham Carter. But Chuck has published more than 20 books. His novel Choke was also made into a movie starring Sam Rockwell. And his brand new novel is called Shock Induction. Chuck's books are dark and funny and clever, which mirrors a lot of the childhood stories that he shared with me. Chuck grew up in rural eastern Washington in the 1960s and 70s and has no shortage of strange and hilarious stories about food and childhood. For example, the Barbie cakes his mom used to make for him and his siblings. She make these cakes a lot?
Until the birthday candles would eventually get to one. That was always a great birthday, when the Barbie went up in flames because the hair was so flammable, and it would be all the kids screaming because the cake was being destroyed, and it would be my mother trying to get this huge flaming cake out of the basement rec room.
If you're not privy to the world of Barbie cakes, don't worry. We'll dive into that history later in the show. But first, my conversation with the oh-so-charming Chuck Palahniuk. Hi there.
Hi there. Are you in Seattle?
I am. Are you in South Washington? Are you in Oregon?
I'm in Portland right now at the moment.
Just a couple of sweatery Pacific Northwesterners. Let's talk about your writing. So your newest book is Shock Induction, and just looking at all of your books throughout all of the years, you are just so prolific, and you've released a novel almost every year since 1996. You're like one of those ladies with 10 kids who's pregnant all the time, but you're pregnant with books. Are you always flooded with ideas? Are you not easily distracted? Are you not on social media? How do you stay so focused?
I'm not on social media. A long time ago, I had some wonderful readers, and they asked if they could be my social media, and I've subsequently hired them. Social media was someplace I just never attached.
So do you even see what they're posting on your page? Do you even know?
No, I don't. And it's kind of a mixed blessing, because sometimes readers will come up to me and say, I read that book you recommended and I loved it. And I've never heard of the book.
You have a secret life, the secret from you.
Exactly. I think it's kind of glorious. It's like a Chuck Palahniuk story.
Yeah, that's so funny. So do you have like a running list? How are you inspired for the storytelling that you do?
You know, it's always got to be something from my own life. I'll tell an anecdote, and if I tell it in a social setting, if the people around me immediately engage and respond with a similar anecdote of their own, that way they develop the story, and they also prove the worth of the story and the sort of commonality of the event. And so every time I'm at a party, I'm testing stories, and I'm also listening for the anecdotes that people tell, that everybody has to chime in with their own version of that.
What is an example of one of those anecdotes that made it into a book?
Oh my gosh. This is coarse. Forgive me. Masturbation fail stories or getting caught stories, or the box of porn in the woods stories. I had no idea that almost everyone on Earth as a child came across a big box of porn in a natural setting. I was leading a workshop once, and out of maybe 25 people, 24 of them had all found a box or a bag or a satchel full of porn in a natural setting. And it was so shocking because no one had ever talked about it. And so suddenly the room was just this explosion of people who had to tell their story. It was such an enormous relief because there was such a joy to everyone who had been suffering alone with this unresolved childhood memory. And to find out that it was really just a rite of passage that everyone had endured, it made everyone high, just euphoric.
Now I feel left out. I'm that one person who's never found porn in the woods.
And the one person in the group who had not found porn on a golf course, on a beach, in a desert, some natural setting, stuffed in a tree, she suggested we all write an anthology. And she came up with a title, and that was going to be Children of the Porn.
That's so good. Did you ever watch that show, Broad City, that was
I
on
did
Comedy
not.
Central?
Sorry. Tell me
Okay.
about it.
Well, I'll tell you this one part because I hate when people tell stories from TV shows and relive them. But they were longtime improvisers when they were creating this show. And in the show, one of them goes on a date and sleeps with an improviser, and he asks her to come to his show. And she's like, I don't want to go. But she goes, and the show is terrible. And the terribleness of the show could only have been written by an improviser because it's like every cliche and stereotype. And the name of the improv group was Statutory Crepe. And
Oh.
that reminds me of this book that this woman came up with. I love it. I hear a lot of writers saying, the worst part about being a writer is writing the book, which always bums me out that a lot of writers don't seem to like the process. They just like having it when it's done. And I read a quote from you where you said, to write is a sustained ecstasy.
Oh my gosh, it is. It is just the most better than any drug high because it lasts longer. It can last for months. And it is just the constant ecstasy you get from solving problems, a constant cascading series of aha moments that you would get in the shower. It is just this extended sense of tension and release, this kind of tantric, ongoing ecstasy.
Wow. Have you met other writers who feel the same way?
The ones that I want to hang out with feel the same way. There are a lot of writers who feel like you really need to go down into a coal mine and really suffer for years at a time. And I don't want to read their books and I don't want to hang out with them. But the people who see writing as like popping corn, that once it starts is this kind of fission reaction of this kind of building ecstasy that can go on again for months at a time. They're always a joy to hang out with.
So you once said that you had a lot of fans in prison that were sending you recipes.
Oh, and the recipes almost always involve top ramen.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that because I love top ramen. And I've always wanted to do a cookbook of just what to do with top ramen.
You should. I mean, this could be your book for next year.
My book another book tour.
Another book tour. Yeah, I have read in the past, because we've kind of touched on this on other shows, that ramen has more value than cigarettes in prison for trading.
I believe it.
What are some of the things that you like to make with ramen? And have you made some of the recipes that had been sent to you?
I think I made a Spam recipe, but my favorite thing is to smash up the ramen and to put it into a mixing bowl with 2 or 3 or 4 scrambled eggs, and to let the whole thing just soak until the ramen soaks up the egginess. Oh my gosh, I'm drooling thinking about it. But and then to scramble it like scrambled eggs. So it's basically scrambled eggs with this kind of softened ramen in it. And it gives the egg such a mouthfeel. It's got a toothiness and a saltiness.
That's like prison matzo brie.
I'll take your word for it.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
So this is a dish that you would make on Passover because you can't have bread. It's like for a week. So they crumble up matzah, and then same thing. They like let the egg kind of soak into it and make it like scrambled eggs. So it's like pieces of crackers in your scrambled eggs.
I love that because I love putting too many crackers in chicken soup until it's this sort of salty mush.
Mushy. Yeah, I like that too. That's like a childhood memory I hadn't thought about for a while. From expired stale Hostess snack cakes to burnt pies, Chuck shares the highs and lows of his childhood eating life. And yes, he considers one of those foods I just mentioned to be a delicacy. That's coming up after the break. Chuck has a lot of strong food memories from his childhood, but they are a far cry from Norman Rockwell-esque scenes. Just like his novels, his stories are stranger than that, and definitely more interesting.
We used to go out and gleaning. As a way to save money is that you would go out into farm fields and you would walk the fields as a child, and you would, after the official harvest, you would pick all the potatoes or the peaches or the nectarines that were of substandard size or damaged. So as a child, we would do this. We would glean potato fields. We would walk along train tracks because these giant hoppers, open hopper cars from Idaho would come rumbling through our little town, and potatoes would fall off either side. So my brother and I would walk with a big pail, and we would pick up russet potatoes from the train tracks. So periodically, we would have these big influx of peaches or nectarines. And at one point, my mother must have canned or frozen 500 pounds of peaches.
Oh my gosh.
And we ate peaches for so long that I really cannot stand to even look at a peach.
And she made pies out of them too, right? And burnt them?
She made a million pies. The thermostat in the oven was bad. She burned every single pie. She froze them, and we still had to eat them, which was another curse of the peaches.
Which is just funny. It's like, you eat your pie, young man, or you're not going to go to sleep. I don't want it.
Did you ever read Shirley Jackson's We've Always Lived in the Castle?
No, I haven't read it.
There is an incredibly gorgeous bit of description in the first part where Mary Cat, one of the two sisters, goes into the basement. And the whole cellar of this mansion is filled with generations and generations of preserved fruits and vegetables. And they're all sitting down there looking beautiful and colorful, but most of them are deadly because they're so old. And so it's this giant combination art gallery, museum, and heritage of both nutrition and poison from generations of Shirley Jackson's family. And so in a way, with the peach pies, we ate it because it was my mother's few forms of creativity. And we didn't want to reject her by not eating her food. So no matter how bad it was, no matter how bad her embroidery was, we still wore it because it meant so much to Mom.
That's really sweet. So you didn't complain or comment on it? You ate it and wore it?
We ate it and wore it because, we knew that it meant so much to her.
That's really nice. Can you talk about the Hostess cupcakes?
Oh, dear God. My grandfather always kept pigs, and his secret for pigs was that in the 2 weeks just before they went to auction, he would put the slats on the back of a pickup truck and so that the bed had really high sides. And he would drive all over Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. I'm drooling again. And he would buy all the day-old Hostess treats from every bake shop and every bakery. And he would bring home heaping pickup trucks full of fruit pies, ho-hos, ding-dongs, Twinkies, snowballs. And as children after school, we would have to open them and drop them into the pigs because the pigs would eat them to the point of sickness. And they would have no fiber, so the pigs wouldn't pass them for 2 weeks. And so the pig would go to auction weighing 200 pounds more than it should. And once it was sold, the inevitable would happen. But by that point, my grandfather had been paid. But as part of feeding the pigs as a child, we would eat these ancient Hostess treats, which by then were gummy and stale, and they had an even better mouthfeel. And the marshmallow parts of the snowballs would be rubbery, and it would take forever to eat. And there was just something so incredible about having the sugar migrated to the outside. So it had a crust on it.
Yeah.
It was
one
always
for the
so...
pig, one for you, one for the pig. That is kind of a crazy scam that he was running, that filling them up and not letting them poop. That's kind of crazy.
They couldn't poop.
Yeah.
They were giant constipated pigs.
I have one of those things with stale food that I still like. I prefer stale graham crackers to fresh ones. They're really soft, but it doesn't seem like a stale soft. I don't know. I really like them. I actually decant them and stale them so that I can eat them that way.
I would have to agree with you. Stale is better. Can I sidetrack for a moment? Just a tangent?
Yeah.
Just because I know that your audience is going to love this. This was a big birthday gimmick from the mid-'60s. You take a glass mixing bowl, a very round, half a sphere glass mixing bowl, and you fill it with cake batter, and then you bake it. So you're making basically a half sphere cake, and you turn it out, and then you take a Barbie doll and you take a steak knife and you cut the Barbie doll's legs off and you jam the Barbie doll in this inverted sphere. And then you put icing on the sphere and on the torso of the doll. So it looks like a woman wearing a hoop skirt.
Yes.
It's kind of a Barbie Scarlett O'Hara cake.
When was this? Because they're still making these.
Because they're a classic.
Yeah.
It's haute couture. It combines fashion and food. People love this. But the disturbing part is that meant that all the time we always had at least one Barbie doll with no legs or with a paraplegic Barbie that had its legs hacked off at the knee. And this thing was always knocking around in some kitchen drawer just waiting to scare you.
Did she reuse it over and over? Did she make these cakes a lot?
Until the birthday candles would eventually get to one. And that was always a great birthday when the Barbie went up in flames because the hair was so flammable. And it would be all the kids screaming because the cake was being destroyed. And it would be my mother trying to get this huge flaming cake out of the basement rec room.
Would you still have to eat it?
No, it would go in the trash at that point.
No. Yeah, with the water being dumped on top, I can see her looking like Carrie, like all the makeup streaming down and maybe some red frosting all over her.
And she would be naked at that point. She would be all burned up and naked on a ruined cake.
And paraplegic.
Yeah, that's a good birthday.
You should make one of those as a surprise for Mike sometime, maybe his next birthday.
No, I'm going to stay married for another 30 years.
You don't think he'd find it funny?
No, not in the slightest.
Doll cakes have been around a lot longer than Chuck Palahniuk's been celebrating birthdays.
1914 is roughly when we think one of the first recipes was published for doll cakes, and that was published in the 20th Century Cookbook, and that comes out of Berkeley, California.
That is food scholar KC Hysmith. You might remember her from the election episode we did a few weeks ago, where she taught us about election cakes.
It's just these tiny little plastic dolls that they would stick into these much, much smaller little cupcake style cakes. So doll cakes have been around for quite some time, but then Barbie came out and doll cakes quickly became synonymous with Barbie. So they became Barbie cakes. But yeah, starting in the late 1980s, Wilton, the cake pan company, they remarketed their bell-shaped pan as a doll cake Barbie cake pan. And it kind of took off from there. So 1990s was the heyday of Barbie cakes.
Casey wrote a piece for Eater titled Out of the Box and Into Cake, It's Barbie. Barbie cakes aren't just for kids' birthday parties anymore. This was right after Greta Gerwig's Barbie movie came out, and Instagram famous bakers were making and posting Barbie cakes. Why did you get interested in doing this story?
I grew up with my grandmother, who was a professional cake baker, which is kind of fueled a lot of my research as a scholar and as a food writer. And I made some of these cakes growing up, and she has all of these pans, and she was obsessed with Barbie. I actually interviewed her for this piece, and she remembers getting her first Barbie. She was, I think, 18 when they came out.
Oh.
And so she was a little bit older, but, still very much a young girl at heart. And she got asked for one for Christmas from her mom that year and got one. And she sewed clothes for it. And so she was obsessed and still is obsessed with Barbie. I took her to the Barbie movie. She did not like it, though. It's a little too progressive for her. We did bond over the cake. So we had a great conversation about these cakes and how they are a huge part of her life. And in so many women of her generation, their lives making these cakes at home, whether that was for their own family or cousins or, friends, or as a way of making a little bit of money on the side as a homemaker. They could practice making these cakes. So that's kind of how I got into it. And just, remembering Barbie cakes as a kid.
Have you made a Barbie cake?
I have, yes, I did. I've made several in my life, and I've had several in my life made for me, but I made one last summer while working on this article. She was a beautiful flower bedecked, crazy Barbie.
Is it true, though, that they sell Barbies without the legs for this very purpose? So you don't have to stick her legs through the cake?
So I don't think they sell Barbie like the brand. Wilton sells doll picks, which are just the top half of the doll with a little stick. But I truly think to have the full Barbie cake experience, you need to have Barbie, because you need to either go through the process of wrapping her legs in cellophane, or don't do it again because she's plastic, and then you just have to wash all the greasy buttercream off of her.
It does
Yeah,
sound
it's a
satisfying
process.
to like pull the Barbie out and have her legs just be cakey and frostingy.
She's covered in frosting, and you can just eat it off of her legs.
My mom has a friend that she does this for everybody's birthday, and she made my mom a mermaid one, and frostings on like the shell bra and then the little
Mhm.
mermaid tail. It's very cute.
See, you've got options.
Yeah, I got options. When we come back, Chuck shares his last meal and the meal he's been eating multiple times a day over the course of the last several years. What would your last meal be?
It would be my friend Lowe's. She makes a corn pudding. So Lowe's corn pudding. It would be Mike's potato pancakes, because Mike makes these potato pancakes that my mother used to make with lots of potatoes and lots of onions
And that's
and
your
lots of
husband,
butter.
Mike.
Yes, Mike. Lowe's corn pudding, potato pancakes, starch on top of starch. I think that'd be it.
Why those two dishes? What's the significance?
The corn pudding has a sweetness to it. That's another thing we used to pick as children, is that we would glean feed corn. After the harvesters would go through, you could pick feed corn, which has an enormous sugar content to it. And the ears of corn are enormous, but it's that high sugar content plus the toothiness of cornmeal that I love about corn pudding. And the potato pancakes have the kind of bitter acridness of onion, and that combined with the fat of the butter and the toothiness of the fried shredded potato, that contrast of fat and bitterness, and then the crunchiness of fried potato is just perfect.
It sounds like a potato latke. Do you put anything on top of it?
A lot of people put sour cream. I'm Ukrainian. A lot of
Okay.
people put applesauce, but no, just butter.
Just butter. So you kind of butter the top?
You butter every surface.
Both sides?
Yes. Both sides, and then you stack them 8 high and put
What?
butter on top.
And then
Eh.
do you eat it like a Dagwood?
No, you eat it with a fork,
Okay.
but I'm also lactose intolerant. So it is a really, it's a mixed blessing. You're eating it knowing that it's going to be an incredible price to pay.
Mm-hmm. Are there other things that you let yourself eat because they're so good and you don't mind if you feel terrible later?
Buttered popcorn,
Mm-hmm.
pizza. Yeah.
Yeah. For his last meal, Chuck Palahniuk wants his friend Lowe's corn pudding and his husband Mike's potato pancakes slathered in butter. So you're a bit of a creature of habit. You eat the same thing several times a day when you're writing?
Several times a day over the course of years and years.
I read in the past it was pizza, but now it's like some kind of tortilla roll-up.
In the past, it was pizza, but in the past, pizza was always the thing that I ate the last week of writing, because I would have to run the printer. And the printer I had, you had to insert one sheet of paper at a time. So you always had to stand next to the printer. We're talking the 1990s.
Yeah.
And insert the pages one at a time. And it would take hours to make a 200-page manuscript.
Oh my God.
And so that's the only time I would have ever sent out for pizza. And I would typically eat pizza for a week trying to get enough manuscripts to make a submission.
That's crazy. What about that paper? Because I remember we had, maybe it's even in the late 80s, that paper with the perforations on the side with the tiny little holes all down the side.
Continuous feed printer paper.
Yeah.
I couldn't afford a printer that used that. And
Oh my
even with that, you would have to sit there and wiggle the edges and tear them off.
I can feel the way that felt, though. I liked that feeling. I think that was early ASMR.
AMSR. MSR, what is that?
This is something that's gotten really popular online where it's this idea that certain sounds give you this feeling in your brain where you feel kind of soothed and almost like a little bit dizzy. Like some people like to hear nails tapping or some people like to hear whispering. For me, I get that sometimes with like a certain sensation of like tearing the paper gives my brain, I feel almost like floating.
And it's also the sensation you get when you tear paper out of a spiral notebook. And
Yes.
all those perforations break in a series. Sandra Bernhardt, the comedian, wrote about being a child and how one thing she loved to do was to take a sharp pencil and to press it through the stretched fabric of her parents' stereo speakers. It would make that popping sensation.
Yeah.
And she could do that for hours if she didn't get caught. But that's also related to serial killers who were stabbers, that there is a kind of fetish related to that sensation of the thing being punctured over and over. And so I think that the spiral notebook, that continuous speed printer tracking, sticking a pencil through the stereo speaker
Yeah.
is kind of related to the Tate murders.
So you're saying Sandra Bernhardt did it. She murdered them.
I was saying she knew what it felt like.
Okay.
Did your mom ever put down like a cheap cut of steak or beef and just have at it with a fork to tenderize it?
Yeah, one of those mallet things.
But they would also use a fork. You put the tenderizer on the Lowry seasoning sauce.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then just stab it over and over a million times.
Yeah.
That was always hard to watch.
Okay, back to Chuck's current creature of habit meal that he has been eating on repeat.
You take a wheat tortilla, whole wheat if you can get it, the big burrito-sized ones, and then you smear Grey Poupon Dijon mustard all over it. And then you pack on a bunch of diced red onion. Then you put a really fatty cheese like Havarti on top of it. Thin slice. You microwave it for about 30 seconds so that the cheese seals the onion to the tortilla. And then you maybe or maybe not put a very thin slice of turkey on it. But then you heap the whole thing like a taco salad with raw spinach. And then you roll it up and then you eat it. The kind of astringent, crunchy mouthfeel of the spinach and the onion combined with the kind of vinegary flavor of the Dijon mustard, that plays against the really fattiness of the Havarti cheese. Lots of crunch. It's like Mike is always making something really fatty like salmon, but serving it with a citrus sauce or with capers that has that sharp flavor that contrasts with the fattiness of the salmon. So I'm always looking for that way to contrast a kind of acerbic bitterness or saltiness with a fattiness.
Well, you can talk about food like you're a gourmand, you know?
I got good training.
So how often do you eat this tortilla roll-up?
I've been eating this since the lockdown, since 2020, and I'll eat it 3 times a day. It's also incredibly filling because there's so much bulk to it.
Yeah.
But the downside is that spinach contains a lot of, I think it's calcium carbonate. I'm a stone thrower. I have a tendency for kidney stones.
I didn't know you guys had a name.
Do you know the writer Diana Abu-Jabbar?
No, I don't.
Oh, she's I want to say Lebanese, a Lebanese-American writer, and her books are really food books. Arabian Jazz is her first book, but her father was a restaurateur, and Diana Abu-Jabbar would be a fantastic guest for you. She's articulate, she's beautiful, and she knows everything about food. She taught me the term stone thrower because she is also a stone thrower. And if you're going to eat a lot of raw spinach, you have to drink a huge amount of water so that your kidneys don't crystallize.
The one creature of habit that I have is I've drank almost the same smoothie almost every day for 8 years, and I put in a huge thing of raw spinach, so I must not be a stone thrower yet. Because now I'm nervous.
You might want to get a CAT scan.
You think there could be one just in there right now, like this big?
And you won't know it until you're on a long flight. And then it'll turn out to be what they call a staghorn stone, where it has multiple branches that go into all the capillaries of your kidney.
Oh my God.
Exactly. I mean, there's a whole world you do not want to know about.
No, I don't want to be a stone thrower, but you guys have cool names.
Staghorn kidney stone.
Staghorn stone thrower. That's a good heroic name.
You get a lifelong subscription to a magazine called Stone Thrower. It's a world organization.
Wait, are
They
you
should be
serious?
They should be courting our vote. We should be a voting bloc.
You should. You should break off and have your own country and your own political system. You have been married for 30 years to a cordon bleu chef.
30 years at the end of this month. Yeah.
Congratulations.
It's inertia at this point.
How does he feel about the way that you eat?
Mike has thousands of cookbooks. We had these big special cases that are just nothing but cookbooks. And the last thing I'm going to buy him is a cookbook. It's frustrating because especially since the lockdown, Mike has really become a baker. And in the past, Mike kind of destroys neighborhoods because he bakes so much and he bakes so well. Eventually, he's always taking the food around, the cookies or the pies or the cakes, to everyone in the neighborhood. So these young married people who have kids suddenly start ballooning up. And so eventually everyone in the neighborhood has diabetes and we just move on.
And a sign on a door, no dessert solicitation.
They never say no.
Last night I went to a reading and it was a baking book, and the guy who wrote the book was telling a story that his neighbors have started to say no to the free desserts, that they look at him like they start turning green and they're like, no more cake.
That's the one thing. Mike doesn't frost. My mother's other big outlet was frosting. They used to have these stainless steel kind of injectors. They looked like big hypodermic needles with different nozzles.
Yeah.
And she would have those to frost these cakes. And so you'd have a very ordinary sort of Duncan Hines mix cake, but it would just be frosted to this incredible wedding cake level every time.
Oh, that's kind of cool. Okay, so there was one thing that her creativity with food that she did well.
It was, yeah. But the downside of the cakes was that the cakes were assembled with so many wooden toothpicks that you had to eat them very gingerly.
Yeah.
Because you never knew when you were going to get a mouthful of wooden splinters.
Yeah.
So it was this beautiful, sugary thing, but it was filled with barbed things.
It was dangerous.
Yeah.
She's trying to kill you some way, whether it's with sharp things or rotten things or burnt things.
There you are.
And that was Chuck Palahniuk's last meal. Pick up Chuck's new novel. It's called Shock Induction. Your Last Meal is a product of Seattle's Cascade PBS. This episode was produced with Maliha Syed and mixed and mastered by Isaac Kaplan-Woolner. Original theme music by Prom Queen, who is playing a show in December in Seattle, which is a rare occurrence these days. She is fantastic. Get yourself a ticket. All of these links are in the show notes. Oh, and I created, host, and co-produce Your Last Meal. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so you never miss an episode. We'll be back next Thursday with a little more Chuck Palahniuk on The Leftovers. And finally, my cookbook is out. It's called Open Sesame, 45 sweet and savory recipes for tahini and all things sesame. You can pick it up at many indie booksellers across the country, at select Barnes & Nobles and Williams-Sonoma stores, or you can order from any big online retailer. And if you leave a review on any website, you are invited to a Zoom cooking class where we're going to cook a couple recipes together for dinner. Sign up for my newsletter or follow along on Instagram to submit your online review, and we will send you the Zoom link. Newsletter is rachelbelle.substack.com. Instagram is Hello Rachel Belle. Again, all of these links are in the show notes. I have a bunch of events coming up in the Pacific Northwest. And if you want to come to a book event, I have several coming up in the next few months. Go to hellorachelbelle.com to check out the calendar. I'm Rachel Belle, and this is Your Last Meal. I wanted to start just by asking you about your name, because I don't use my real name for my job because nobody can pronounce my last name.
What is it? What is it?
It's like 8,000 consonants next to each other. And I was wondering, how much of your identity you think is caught up in having a name that people have a hard time pronouncing?
I've always thought ever since I was a child that was a blessing, because everybody else in my class would be Mr. So-and-so and Miss So-and-so, and I would always be Chuck. And at the DMV, it's the same thing. The moment they would start to say a name and then hesitate, I knew it would be me. So it's a blessing.
You were in a very formal school that they were calling the kids Mr. and Miss?
It was a country school, but it was I think it was just a different time. And it was also a tendency when you tended to be in trouble, you would be called by a more formal name.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't change my name anyway with marriage, but I thought, how weird to become a Smith. Like, ugh, it sounds so boring.
But have you developed a rhythm for spelling it? Because you have to spell it so often.
Oh, yeah. What's yours?
Palahniuk.
Oh,
Always say it the same way.